Hello, good morning still. Welcome to the second day of B-Sides Villages Talks. Again, it's our first year doing this, so thank you for being a part. Thank you for presenting Ben. Ben is going to talk to us today about some of the blurry lines between physical and digital security and all that he learned while working at Hollywood Video. He's coming from IoT Village, so make sure you stop by there as well. And without further ado, let's give it up for Ben.
All right, thanks very much to B-Sides, and I hope you all enjoy this extremely serious conversation about security. I'm sure it won't be silly at all. So I have to start off by including this slide and saying, what actually is Hollywood Video? You know, I had a revelation as I was putting this together that there may be some younger people or people from different parts of the country who haven't even heard of this place before. But we used to have this thing called a video rental store that you could go to. And instead of going on Netflix and just streaming something, you actually had to receive a tape from somebody and scan a membership card to get a video, and you keep it for a few days and return it. You didn't just stream it. What an amazing thing. You might get, if you're a lucky kid like I was, you might be able to get yourself a VHS tape and an N64 game to rent on the same day if you're really feeling lucky. Other things you should know about Hollywood Video and what it is yes, I did make minimum wage there, which at the time was $5.15 an hour. And yes, they did make me wear a fake bow tie and cummerbund to do this and demean myself every day. But I did it at that very Hollywood Video on Reisterstown Road in Baltimore, Maryland, so I could get that lovely 1990 Toyota Camry DX, my very first car. So it was worth it. It was a lot of fun. Real quick, who is ISE? Who are we? So I wanted to give you my perspective here. ISE is a security consulting company. We actually run the IoT Village. If you want to check it out after the talk, we're over in the Village area. We do a number of white box security assessments, pen tests, device hacks, etc. I help people with scopes and things like that. We also offer something called START. If you want to learn more about it, feel free to come see me after the talk. There were some issues working at Hollywood Video. It wasn't exactly the tightest ship. To give you a sense, a day at Hollywood Video would go from 9 a.m. to 1 a.m. Those were our typical business hours. And we had 4 people working the entire day. So we would have people working from 9 to 5 p.m., 2 people, and then 5 p.m. to 1 a.m., 2 people. It was not a great situation. You saw how big that store was. We had to cover that entire place. You may notice all the fire. This is fine. That's because the HVAC in the place stunk. And so when I had to wear that stupid bow tie and cummerbund every day, I had to sweat it out because there was no air conditioning. We actually accepted checks back in the day to pay for videos, and we had a terrible point of sale system that was a real POS, and I don't mean point of sale. There's also just a ton of stuff going on at a video store. I mean, the experience at the time was I would go in, you would have a bunch of tapes that were already returned. People were coming in asking for stuff, trying to check out. You had to put things back on the shelf. You had to rewind tapes, doing all of this stuff and keep the store clean and maintain it. And you had 2 people to do all this stuff, including a manager who may have been in the back counting out a register or something like that. So it was a really chaotic situation working at this place for someone making minimum wage, a 16, 17-year-old kid. There was one other issue that really is the point of this whole discussion at Hollywood Video, which is that we had a big problem with shrinkage. Now, you may know shrinkage from the Seinfeld episode, but shrinkage in the concept of retail is loss of inventory and assets. And at Hollywood Video, it was a sieve for this kind of thing. We lost all kinds of stuff all the time. Theft was a constant problem. And that's kind of the premise here. We're going to go through some of the things that happen at Hollywood Video. And I want to give you a sense of why it happened and what you can take away from it. So when you create your own sort of threat modeling or come up with your own security strategy, you can sort of keep these lessons in mind. So why did all this stuff happen? There was tapes, cash, and food constantly missing. Our inventories were never right. We would lose money. There are things I can't even talk about that we lost. We should really want to know if those security controls that we had in place were proper. Was it the right approach, or was it just we had lost because we weren't doing it in the proper way? I think it's really also important to ask, what was the actual culture of security like at Hollywood Video? Did they actually care about security, or is it just sort of lip service? Was it just something they said? And what did people care about? So what did the customers care about? What did the employees care about? What did the managers care about? And what did corporate care about? And what's the proper level of care? Because fundamentally, you know, I'm saying right now that we lost all this stuff. There was all these losses and things like that. But was that by design? What did Hollywood Video actually care about? What is acceptable loss? What is acceptable risk? We really should get into that. So let's walk through sort of a basic threat modeling exercise. Obviously, this is not a full threat model, but this is how you should probably think of protecting some kind of organization. So we had a number of assets at Hollywood Video. Obviously, the first would be things like tapes, and those are the actual tape things that we would have, those cases. There was also stuff like food. So we actually sold popcorn, candy, sodas, ice cream, etc. And we had a ton of it. It would come in all the time. There's obviously cash in the register, you know, that people were very concerned about making sure that we didn't lose money. It wasn't exactly a high revenue place, so if things were stolen, that would be a real problem. I think it's really important to think about the operation of the store as an asset too. So if the place isn't open, if things aren't running, if people can't rent tapes, if the systems don't work, there is no revenue and none of it even works in the first place. Finally, the employees and the customers themselves. So we were instructed if someone came in with a gun or something and wanted to rob us, just give them what they want. They didn't want us to get involved. They didn't want us to put ourselves in danger for good reason. You know, they have insurance and things that cover that stuff. And also, the customers need to be comfortable in the store, right? If Hollywood Video was a place where people didn't feel comfortable doing business, then we couldn't keep making revenue. Things wouldn't keep worrying about. So before I go on, I mean, what do you guys think in the audience? What do you think is the most important asset Hollywood Video has? Any volunteers? Sure. Maybe. How much do you, out of curiosity, how much do you think a tape cost to rent in 1999? Like, in other words, when Hollywood Video would get a tape to rent, how much do you think that tape cost Hollywood Video? No. Actually, if you were to buy, you know, one of the popular titles we had back then was the movie Star Wars Episode 1. And if you were buying a copy of the tape to rent, you had to pay like $80 a tape just to rent it because of licensing stuff. So losing a tape was actually a lot more than losing a tape you might buy at Suncoast, another place that no longer exists. My argument would be that the asset that they cared about the most was probably the operation of the store and the employees. Because a lot of these things are kind of replaceable. If the store isn't safe, if the store's not a good place to work at or shop at, I don't think any of these things matter. We had a number of threats and adversaries as well. So I put a couple of things here. So we had common thieves, people who would come in and they might walk out with a tape or open up one of those tape cases and put it in their pocket or steal candy or whatever, or whatever. More importantly, there might be someone who's actually dangerous. You know, I don't think fundamentally we were too worried about someone walking off with a tape. Life would move on. But if someone came in with a gun or was threatening us, that was something that was a real concern to the operation of the store. But there's another aspect. And even though this guy looks really friendly with his bow tie and cummerbund, and he looks like he couldn't harm a fly, he's actually kind of an insider threat because there's things like accidents, compromises on policy, which I'm going to talk about in a second, and then just straight up dishonesty where employees would take stuff. And I would definitely never have done that. That's definitely not something I did at Hollywood Video as a kid. We did have a few security tools in place to help protect us and make things a little bit better. But you might notice that none of these things are particularly foolproof. Yes, what you had to do in 1999 was get a little membership card laminated so you could get permission to rent a tape. And if you didn't have your membership card, I'm sorry, I couldn't rent a tape to you, which was the cause of many arguments with customers. We also had things like the locks on the doors, the alarm system, etc. But these were mostly meant to protect people from breaking into it. And as you may have seen from the picture, it was pretty much a glass building. If someone wanted to get in, they could have probably gotten in. We had things like manager oversight. It might not surprise you that when I was making minimum wage, the assistant manager who would be in the store wasn't making a whole lot more than that. So expecting these managers to be high-level security leaders was probably a little unreasonable. We had things like an inventory system and a point-of-sale system that didn't really work well. That, unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture of the actual point-of-sale system, but it didn't totally differ from that right there. It was like a blue screen thing that was extremely slow. It barely worked at all. It would print, even at the time, it was considered antiquated. We also had things like the lockbox that we would use. So when people wanted to return tapes, we had this big container, and you can see it right there, where people just slide things in. It was locked up, and in the morning, somebody had to go in and reach in and pull out all of the tapes that were in there. And we also had those little anti-theft things that are put near doors that make noise all the time that nobody ever does anything about when they make noise, because people just walk right through them. It's not exactly foolproof security controls. So let's talk real quick about what actually happened at Hollywood Video and what actual stuff we lost. So tapes and video games, we had a number of issues. The first thing that I saw all the time was a customer would come in and say, yeah, I returned it. Let me rent another tape. Well, according to the system here, you didn't return it. Well, no, I returned it. And the truth is, as an employee who was making not that much money, I wasn't going to sit there and argue with them about it. If they argued, the manager would just let them go on and you'd rent the next tape to them. There was other things like broken inventory, things that actually did break. VHS tapes were a little bad in certain areas. You sometimes had to splice them and things like that. I could talk all about that. But then there was also broken inventory, where a customer would come in and they would say, hey, this N64 game doesn't work. Donkey Kong 64 isn't booting up. I don't know what's happening. And we had these 2 drawers that were filled with inventory that was claimed to be broken. Now, when someone comes to you and says, this tape doesn't work, it's not like I'm going in the back and testing the tape and doing all this stuff. Or they say the N64 game's not working, I'm going to test it. You just put it in the door and give them the credit, and then that's it. One day, one of my managers said to me, hey, Ben, you're a video game guy. You collect video games. There's all this stuff in the drawer. We need somebody to go test this, bring it home, and figure out what actually works and what doesn't. And none of those games worked. It was a mirror. I don't know what happened to them. None of them worked. They definitely didn't stay in my house, and I definitely don't still have them. We also had things like common theft. It's pretty self-explanatory, and other stuff like that. Another thing that happened to me personally was cash losses. One day I was working till 5, and my manager at the time told me, hey, just clock out and go home. I'm going to count down your register, and we're going to just keep it running. And I see someone in the audience already shaking their head. The next day I came in, and the manager said to me, hey, Ben, I'm going to write you up. Your register was 40 bucks short. I didn't take the money. Nothing happened. But we didn't follow policy. I didn't count down my drawer, and so somehow the money wasn't lined up the next day. I wonder who took it. The food was also interesting. So we had all this popcorn and candy and soda and all this other stuff. And after a few hours, managers would straight up tell me, hey, Ben, go grab an ice cream sandwich. Go grab some candy or whatever. They just let you take things. So they would give us a message that it's really important to track inventory. It's really important to make sure the cash is right. But go ahead and take whatever else you want. Just take things, even though we do count them, even though we do put them towards inventory. So we were just constantly losing things. There's also another incident I can't even talk about. It was so significant. Why did this happen? Why were there so many losses? Why was this such a problem? A lot of this was based on constraints. There was only so many things we can do, and it's really important that you acknowledge when it comes to security, there are going to be limitations in what you can reasonably achieve. The first thing is employee safety, right? We weren't supposed to argue with customers about what was done and what wasn't. If somebody came in and was violent, you let them do whatever they want. You don't get in the way. You just take care of them. Our inventory controls were terrible. We had to do inventory once every few months. And the way inventory worked is they would close the store entirely, and they expected 2 employees to go through the entire store and scan every piece of inventory in the store. Probably 10,000 tapes and games and a countless number of other sort of things, accessories, candy, whatever. That wasn't really realistic, and inevitably our inventories were always messed up and we were always losing stuff. Or things would come back, all of a sudden you thought they were lost, and then you find them later in some other place. Checking tapes was just not something that was going to happen. And the store is just huge. You just can't see everything that's going on in a place like this. If somebody in the back is messing with things at the back wall, I would have never known about it. It's just going to happen. We're not supervising this stuff. The other problem was just the bad management in place. They had policies, but nobody followed them. Nobody cared. It wasn't enforced. And we had a culture that was very permissive about taking things. It was more about getting through stuff than actually being secure. So what should you do with this information? In my opinion, the thing you should really do if you're trying to protect your home, your personal stuff, your organization, your business, whatever, is to create some kind of threat model. Batman gets it. Batman knows what he needs to do to protect his organization, what his assets are, who he's trying to protect, what tools he has to protect the Batcave and other things in place, and what's out there. So what you really need to do is understand what your actual assets are and put a value on them. It's not just things like cash or stuff. It's things like reputation, availability of your service, what people think of you, their comfort level working with you. These are all assets. We need to think about things outside of the realm of physical, traditional assets. You should also understand what your adversaries are. At Hollywood Video, our adversaries were employees, common thieves, and robbers. Pretty straightforward stuff. But you might work in an organization where your adversaries are foreign countries and people who work for them. It may be serious cyber criminals. It may be people, sophisticated criminals who are really looking to do harm. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, we have to understand the tools that are in place and then really make sure that we've tested their effectiveness so that we know if we have these tools in place, are they getting the job done? Are they really protecting us the way they are? And can we verify that so that we know if something's gonna happen, at least we have the right things in place. So anyway, that's it. I didn't want to, we're kind of limited on time. I wanted to give you guys lots of time to ask questions and most importantly, contact us. And so if you want, I have a QR code here that you can scan if you want a free copy of the book Hackable. I will say, I know sometimes people have issues with the QR code. If you do, just come find me. I'll make sure you get it. Check out the IoT Village booth. Reach out to me. You have my email. You could contact me on LinkedIn, whatever you want. Happy to talk with you about anything. And with all that said, happy to answer questions. Yes.
Membership, did you guys?
Can you use, I could barely hear you.
Thanks. In order for someone to sign up for a membership and get a card back in the day, did you require them to fill out a paper form to put their home address, phone number, and credit card numbers? And did you enter that into a computer that everyone shared the password for?
Sort of. It was kind of like that. So the way a membership would work, if I recall correctly, I would need an ID, like a driver's license type thing. I think I had to photocopy it, so I had to keep a copy of their ID. They would have to give me a credit card, and I think it had to be like a real credit card, not a debit card, so we wouldn't accept that. And we did have to key it in. And the idea theoretically was, well, if we have their credit card in and then they steal a tape or they don't return something, we can just charge the card. I don't remember a single time where we actually did that. I think it was more or less that you ask for these things to sort of scare the customer into thinking they can't just get away with taking stuff forever. It was a pretty not tight system, and I certainly think that the people at PCI or any number of things like this sort of practice would not be acceptable today, taking all this information. So yeah. What other questions? You guys can ask any kinds of questions you want, especially if they're nostalgic ones. Anybody? Any other questions? Yes. Hold on.
Was it the same at Blockbuster, or were they better or worse? Or
We were way better than Blockbuster. No. It was fairly similar. So Blockbuster and Hollywood, I mean, to be honest, the reason I worked at Hollywood and not Blockbuster, I mean, I love movies, I love video games, I still collect video games and things like old retro games. Hollywood was walking distance from my house. I could literally just walk there, and then people could observe me walking down the street in the goofy uniform and stuff like that in the middle of the summer. But anyway, they're very similar stores. They had a specific kind of culture. They operated mostly the same. Was one better than the other? Honestly, it was 6 of one, half dozen of the other. We would have things that they didn't have. They would have things we didn't have. I was envious that they got to wear polo shirts and not stupid bow ties. I really hated that. But they're equivalent to me. Anyone else? Anyone want to ask any other questions? Anything? Yes. He's got a mic.
I know all the video stores eventually went out of business because they became obsolete, but do you attribute that to Hollywood being incompetent, or was it just they were
No, I mean the business.
obsolete?
Yeah, the business model. So the question was like, did Hollywood fail because of these kinds of issues, or is it because of something else? I mean, the reality is Netflix came along and destroyed this model. Streaming, in particular, ended what would make sense. I mean, people don't want to do this stuff. You can still see the remnants of this with things like Redbox, which I think still is around, where you rent the things from the machine, or even like GameFly and some of these other services I think still exist to do rentals. But the model is totally different. Now it's hold on to it as long as you want. it has to be more consumer friendly, just like streaming. It has to have that kind of same convenience. But you can tell nobody really does it. It's just not worth it. Nobody wants to drive to a store and pick things up. It's so much easier just to pull something from Netflix or Amazon Prime Video or something like that. Yeah. Yes.
If I approach you afterwards, would you be willing to talk about the situation you can't talk about?
A little bit. I just don't want to talk about it publicly, but we can talk about it.
All
It
right,
was
cool.
a big deal, but I'll talk about it after.
I want to know about
Yeah,
what happened.
It's pretty crazy. Anybody else? Anybody else? Bueller. All right, cool. All right.
All right, wonderful.
Can I do a little selfie with you guys? Is that okay? Can you just like raise your hands? Hey! Thank you so much, everybody.
All right, give it up for Ben.